Chilling encounters, stories of the unexplained. Have you ever felt the hair on the back of your neck stand up for no reason? Or sensed someone watching you when you were completely alone? Well, buckle up because today we're diving into stories that might just keep you up at night. It was a quiet, foggy night in a small town. Chris was driving home from his late night shift. The road was empty, and the only sound was the hum of his car's engine. As he approached the old wooden bridge on the outskirts of town, he noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a woman in a long white dress, her hair hanging down over her face. Chris slowed down and rolled down his window to ask if she needed help, but before he could say anything, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and dark. Then, in a blink, she disappeared into thin air. Chris slammed on his brakes and jumped out of the car, but she was gone. When he told the locals about it, they all had the same response. "You saw her too, didn't you?" Turns out she's been haunting that bridge for decades. No one knows why, but everyone agrees on one thing. Once you see her, she's hard to forget. Sarah and her husband decided to take a weekend getaway to a historic hotel known for its charm and its ghost stories. They laughed off the tales as silly folklore and checked into their room on the third floor. The first night was uneventful, but on the second night, things got weird. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke up to the sound of faint whispers. She nudged her husband, but he was fast asleep. She tried to brush it off, thinking it was just her imagination, but then the whispers grew louder. It sounded like a man and a woman arguing right outside their door. She got up to check, but the hallway was empty. As she turned to go back inside, she noticed something chilling. The mirror above the dresser had fogged up, as if someone had breathed on it, and written in the condensation were the words, "Get out." They didn't waste any time. They packed up and checked out before sunrise. Later, they found out their room had a history. Decades ago, a couple had stayed there, and only one of them checked out alive. Jake had just moved into a new apartment. It was nothing fancy, but it was his first place on his own, and he was excited. The first few nights were fine, but then he started noticing something strange. Every time he turned off the lights, he'd see a shadow in the corner of his bedroom. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light or maybe his eyes playing tricks on him, but the shadow didn't go away. In fact, it seemed to move closer each night. One night he decided to leave a lamp on and try to ignore it, but as he lay in bed, he felt a cold breeze sweep across his face. When he opened his eyes, the shadow was right next to him. He could feel the weight of its presence, heavy and suffocating. He froze, unable to move or even scream, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Jake moved out a week later. He never found out what it was, but he swears he'll never live alone again. Emily and her friends loved exploring the woods near their neighborhood. One summer evening, as the sun was setting, they decided to stay out a little later than usual. They were laughing and joking when they heard a soft giggle coming from deeper in the forest. Thinking it was another kid from the neighborhood, they called out, but no one answered. They followed the sound and came across a little girl sitting on a fallen tree. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress and had a doll clutched in her hands. When they asked her if she was lost, she just smiled and pointed behind them. They turned around, but there was nothing there. When they looked back at the girl, she was gone. No footsteps, no rustling in the bushes, just gone. They ran back home and told their parents, who warned them to stay out of the woods at night. Years later, Emily found out about a girl who had gone missing in those woods decades ago. Her body was never found, but sightings of her ghost have been reported ever since. Tom was driving cross-country to visit his family. It was late and he was exhausted, but he was determined to push through. As he drove down a lonely stretch of highway, he saw a man standing on the side of the road, hitchhiking. Feeling a little uneasy but also guilty, Tom decided to pull over. The man climbed into the back seat and thanked him for the ride. He didn't say much, just gave Tom directions to a small town a few miles ahead. But as they drove, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The man's reflection in the rearview mirror seemed blurry, almost like he wasn't really there. When they reached the town, Tom turned around to tell the man they had arrived, but the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened, and there was no sign of him anywhere. Shaken, Tom stopped at a diner to collect himself. When he told the waitress what had happened, she just nodded and said, "You met him, huh? He's been hitching rides on this highway for years." As Tom sat there, sipping his coffee and trying to process what had just happened, another customer chimed in. An older man at the counter shared his own experience, claiming to have picked up the same hitchhiker years ago. The details were eerily similar. The man had given vague directions, sat in silence for most of the ride, and vanished just before reaching his supposed destination. The waitress added that the hitchhiker's story was a tragic one. Legend had it that he was a young man who had died in a car accident on that stretch of highway decades ago. Now, his restless spirit wanders the road, trying to complete the journey he never finished. Tom couldn't shake the chills that ran down his spine. He finished his coffee, got back in his car and drove off, but the experience stayed with him. Even now he avoids that highway at night, unwilling to risk another encounter with the phantom hitchhiker. Mia's family had just moved into a new house, and everything seemed perfect until they started hearing noises coming from the basement. At first it was just faint creaks and groans, but then things escalated. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker, and doors would slam shut without warning. One night, Mia decided to confront whatever was causing the disturbances. Armed with a flashlight, she made her way down to the basement. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, the light flickered, and she saw it. A figure standing in the corner, its face obscured by shadows. She froze, unable to move as the figure slowly turned its head towards her, and then, in an instant, it lunged. Mia screamed and ran up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. Her family didn't believe her at first, but when they found scratches on the inside of the basement door the next morning, they decided it was time to move. These stories may send chills down your spine, but they're also a reminder of just how little we truly understand about the world around us. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing is certain: there are some things that defy explanation. And sometimes, those things are closer than we'd like to think. So the next time you feel a cold breeze or see something out of the corner of your eye, maybe don't look too closely. Driven by curiosity and fear, Mia and Tom both faced the unknown, unraveling mysteries that transcended the ordinary, challenging their perceptions of reality. As dusk fell, Mia and Tom uncovered secrets buried in their intertwined fates, revealing truths that would forever alter their understanding of life and death.